Well, I'm delighted to be here. I'm not so sure you'll be delighted to have heard what I have to say when I finish. The picture I'm about to paint is not nearly as rosy as what Brian painted, because I'm one of those trial lawyers who have to fight these people. And I fight them in the courts all across this country every day. I think I am pleased that Dr. Len Bull and his wife Angie and Katie invited me to address you. I'm not so sure, as I said, that you'll be pleased that I was here to talk to you, because I want to tell you the social contract with American agriculture is broken. In fact, following up on what my colleague just said about the UK, in the last 2 weeks, the housewives of the United Kingdom have not had eggs on the shelves to buy. That's what these policies bring. That's what HSUS, PETA, and the United States Environmental Protection Agency that I helped put together is doing to American agriculture. They are slowly but surely destroying the foundations of American agriculture, and I will go through some of that with you here today. I want you to look at these items, and I've got a lot more material here, obviously, than I want to go through today. But I want you to understand what the American public used to trust with us, they no longer trust with us. And look at that list. Now, we have had great successes, as Brian points out. Enormous successes. And whoever has their computer on, delighted for you to take this down, because this will be on the web page. We have large foundations in this country that are opposed to everything that you are doing. They are opposed to monoculture. They're opposed to the CAFOs that we were talking about here. They're opposed to opposition, and they're in opposition to our international trade. Look at the fights that we had in terms of Panama, Colombia, and South Korea. Look at where our trade is. And I will take issue, not that I personally do that with Brian, because he's absolutely correct. We have to worry about feeding the world. But something else we have to worry about. There are hundreds of foundations in this country, and every environmental group and every animal activist group in this country is opposed to our going to 9 billion people. And you hate to say this, but there does not seem to be the same concern that we all have about feeding people. Feeding people and keeping them from dying with these organizations, or otherwise they would not take the positions. And as I just pointed out, in the last 10 days, the housewife of the UK has not been able to buy eggs on the English supermarket shelf. That's where we are going in this country. And you see it with the deal that the United Egg Producers are trying to put together with HSUS to go to the larger cages. You see it with the decisions made by McDonald's and others in the last few days not to want to purchase hogs that are housed in gestation crates. That's what this represents. Now, a little diversion. All the speakers up here have these slides so that you can take a look at them. This comes from a story that with this administration came to town. You probably will guess after a period of time, I'm not particularly high on this administration. It's in Washington, D.C. But then Chief of Staff Rahm Emanuel had one of his speechwriters come in to him right after the administration went into power and said, you know, everybody's getting a big raise around here. I'd like to have a raise. And Emanuel said, no, we can't afford to raise. Everybody's giving us a lot of grief with regard to all of the money that we're spending in this administration. And so the young speechwriter went away and he decided, okay, I will accept that for a period of time. So in Washington, D.C., most people get their little notebooks or their slides or what have you ahead of time. They don't do it. A staff actually does it, unlike Brian. Now, Brian, I assume you did all your work here today. Absolutely. Absolutely. So Emanuel gets his little notebook after coming out of a meeting with the president, and he doesn't have time to look at it because he's busily taking phone calls, and he goes to this group, much like this one there at the Washington Hilton Hotel. And when it comes his time to speak, much like mine here today, He says, ladies and gentlemen, I'm delighted to be here. I'm going to talk about the following issues, where his speechwriter had written down he thought his entire speech, and on the first page it says, you know, I'm going to talk to you about all these animal agricultural issues today and what EPA is doing to agriculture. I'm going to talk about the President's health bill and all the issues there. I'm going to be talking about our foreign policy issues, and at that time what we're going to do with the nuclear missile shield that we're going to put in the Czech Republic. And he said, I'm also going to talk about all the issues that EPA is going to be engaging in and trying to deal with carbon dioxide and issues of that nature, at which point he gets to the end of the first page, Brian, where he turns the page over where the young speechwriter has written, now, USOB, you're on your own, I quit. Now, I'm sure none of us will have that problem here today. Back to the serious side of this. We are in a very serious time, ladies and gentlemen. I'm a farmer. I raise corn and soybeans in Illinois as well as practice law all over this country. Yesterday, the United States Environmental Protection Agency issued a rule that ended the coal industry in this country. It said there will be no more new coal-fired power plants built in this country because you cannot sequester or control the CO2 coming from your facility. Existing power plants will be left in place. This president said during his campaign, we want electricity rates to skyrocket. They started on that yesterday. If you can tell the coal industry of this country that they cannot build coal-fired power plants, it's just as easy, and I will go into this in a few moments, to say you cannot use the antibiotics Brian's talking about. It's just as easy for EPA to say you cannot use, as a farmer, the phosphorus, phosphate, or nitrogen because, as you will see in my presentation here, it pollutes the waters of the United States. Look at this decision that was made yesterday. You're going to hear a lot more about it. Without any congressional authorization, the United States EPA says no more coal-fired power plants in this country. And you can't build a nuclear plant, and the environmentalists will not allow you to build a hydroelectric plant. These are serious issues, my friends. And look at these 5 issues. And the last one I'll talk about is criminalization of American agriculture brought on by EPA against animal agriculture in this country. Here's something you probably haven't heard about. I just stuck this in last night. We were given notice of this earlier this week. Your United States Department of Agriculture has a RFP out, and this will impact all of you. This RFP is for data mining. This is Big Brother in spades. This is, and HSUS may get the contract for this. Look at what's up there on that board. You're going to have the USDA hiring people to mine and go through the internet to collect animal data on managing animals, and it gets worse. They're going to monitor the internet for sales of all animals, those exhibited to the public, particularly those in research and teaching, and we've seen what's happened there, haven't we? Horse shows and animal auctions. Our law firm represents the horse industry. And I mean the entire horse industry, and that means the horse slaughter issue. You saw what happened. You can be put out of business. The horse slaughter industry is gone. Charlie Stenholm of our firm may be getting it back. We may be on the verge of getting our first horse slaughter plant. When you think we cannot be shut down, Brian, they can shut you down. You do have a defense in FDA, thank goodness. Some of the rest of us don't have that. Farm dust. You even heard Mitt Romney talking about this in the last presidential debate. He was afraid if the Wright brothers were still around, they wouldn't be able to fly the plane because of dust. Now, I don't think for a minute Mitt Romney understood what he was talking about. And I support Mitt Romney, don't get me wrong. This is a standard to put the cattle industry basically out of business in this country. You want to know why the dairy industry is moving out of California? It's because it costs up to $80,000 a ton to buy an offset for the dust you put into the air. That's what EPA wants to do. They want to lower, right now, and you don't know these numbers, you can look at them, but 150 micrograms, you can't see it in the air. They want to cut that in half. Most cattle feed yards in this country are generating well over 200. They're in violation. You can be shut down, or you can have a criminal action brought against you. Even what comes out of our combines, guys like me who are grain farmers, in the fall, we might have difficulty meeting this. American Farm Bureau, thank goodness they are there, and all of you should think about this as well. You're going to have to get a lot more involved in litigation. That's not to make me more money. It is to save American agriculture. American Farm Bureau is out there on the front lines. I was involved in this case. I represented the ag retailers of this country. We lost. That's why EPA is regulating, can regulate farm dust today. Any of you here from Arizona, Maricopa County? No one. In Maricopa County, the best management practices include putting a mister on your tillage equipment to keep the dust down. Best management practices means harvesting at night. Now, some of us harvest at night, no big deal. Also, it means EPA can tell you maybe what crop you can plant. That's what EPA is doing in this country. And again, I keep coming back to this point of yesterday. When you can tell the American industry without any support from Congress that you can't use coal anymore, that's pretty serious. GMOs. A couple of stories. How many of you have heard of Mark Francis? Anybody here? You're veterinarians. There's a guy back there. Mark Francis. It's exactly what Brian was talking about, technology. Mark Francis was a professor. In the 1880s, we only had about one brand of cow in this country, and it was the Longhorn. And you know why? Ticks, Texas fever, ticks. You took cattle any place in this country, and they died. Well, good old Mark Francis figured out that if you dipped these cattle and ran them through a cattle dipping thing with arsenic and a few other chemicals in it, you kill the ticks. This is 1880. By 1920, we had all sorts of breeds of beef cattle in this country, and the beef cattle industry exploded in growth. Back to his point about many fewer acres being needed. Chickens. There must be some chicken people in here. Any chicken people? I represent Rose Acre Farm. So anybody? Yeah, we've got a couple of chicken people here. How many of you have heard of Russell Crouch? You know what Russell Crouch did for this industry? One guy. I mean, Brian is absolutely correct. We have so many great stories we can tell about American agriculture, and we're not telling them. Russell Crouch. You know, we used to have presidential campaigns where they said a chicken in every pot. God's sake, excuse me, didn't mean to scare you. Get so excited up here. A chicken in every pot. Because chicken was like lobster today. Well, actually, lobster is pretty plentiful too. Caviar. Russell Crouch figured out if you fed that chicken B12 and a few other little chemicals, that instead of 80 days to put on 3 to 4 pounds on that broiler, you could do it in 40 to 45 days, and you did it with 5 pounds. Those are the great stories we have to tell, and all of you, as he says, have to get out there and start telling them. In the early 1900s, we were using about 440 million acres in this country to grow all of our crops. Today, it's about 325 to 330 million acres. We're a nation of 2,250 million acres. We have these great stories of how successful we've been. But GMOs are being fought by those people I talked about at the beginning of the speech, the environmentalists like the Sierra Club, Natural Resources Defense Council. Virtually every environmental group in this country, every liberal group, is against the Frankensteinization of our food by using GMOs. And if you don't believe it, look at what's happening to Monsanto. Those of you who must be in the cattle industry know about the alfalfa fights that are going on out in California. The environmentalists are trying to keep glyphosate and alfalfa off the market. They're trying to keep the GMO sweet corn off the market. They're using something called the National Environmental Policy Act. And I just want to bring that to your attention. These environmental statutes are being used against agriculture in more ways than you can even imagine. The genetically modified organism issue starts with the Plant Protection Act over at USDA. Environmentalists say you have to do an environmental impact statement, and if you haven't heard about environmental impact statements, that's exactly what's holding up the XL Keystone Pipeline. These environmental statutes and the people who are opposed to what it is we are doing are using the environmental statutes to slow down and go after agriculture. And in terms of the technology he's talking about, the National Environmental Policy Act is being used to quell and to keep technology from advancing the way all of you want and the way I want. This is just a rundown for you to look at later if you want to pull this off the website. I assume Katie will have it on there. The environmentalists go to that great agricultural court called the U.S. District Court of San Francisco. The heart of agriculture. And they're winning. But they will be in the Ninth Circuit trying to keep glyphosate alfalfa off the market. You think they can't stop us? Any of you familiar with the sugar beet industry? Have any ties to the sugar beet industry? The environmentalists actually kept the sugar beet industry almost from planting glyphosate sugar beets this season. Ladies, most of your sugar comes from sugar beets in this country. It doesn't come from sugar cane. Sugar is terrible for you, according to them. And it may be if you have too much of it. But their belief is you've got to start taking food away from the American consumer, and these cases are just the beginning. My gentleman friend here from Feedstuffs has an article today on the front page of the paper that he handed out to you about effluent limitations. This is just like carbon dioxide, my friends. The environmentalists want to take away the nutrients that you're using on growing your crops. And if you don't believe that, let me just give you a specific example back to CO2. Most of you think, well, global warming has to do with CO2, what you're breathing out right now, what comes out of the tailpipes of our car. No, there are 6 gases worldwide the environmentalists want to control. One of those is methane. Now, have any idea where methane comes from? Mostly animals. In fact, one story says we get rid of all the animals on the planet, we can take care of our global warming problem because methane, half-life, 8 years, CO2, 100 years, that will take care of that. But get rid of the protein that we're talking about, and you are engaged in. The third gas that no one pays any attention to is nitrous oxide, N2O. Now, have any idea where the biggest generator of N2O is in this country? It's corn producers like me. N2O comes from our anhydrous ammonia. EPA wants to get control of that. And if you don't believe that, look at permits that are issued for CAFOs. EPA is telling farmers what crops they can plant. This is a big issue. The effluent limitation story he has on the front page of Feedstuffs today comes out of this case that I've got mentioned right here, Florida Wildlife versus Jackson. The Sierra Club and all the environmental groups and EPA are saying we are going to control the runoff of the nutrients, i.e. phosphorus and nitrogen, from the nation's farms and ranches. The Texas Cattlemen Association, or Florida Cattlemen Association Farm Bureau has sued, and they have lost in Florida. We are going down, and you may have heard about the Chesapeake Bay Initiative. There is going to be a major initiative going right into the Midwest of EPA attempting to get numeric water quality criteria for nutrients. That means rivers and streams will have limits on them. And who are they going to come after? American agriculture to do that. And look at that one note there from the Florida Ag Commissioner. That's Charlie Bronson. Some of you, I don't know if anybody's here from Florida or not. Mr. Bronson says you implement this, you shut down Florida agriculture. I don't know what's going to happen. This is one of the legal threats. Everglades Foundation just issued a report last week saying that, and this is where we in agriculture, I do think, are falling short. We do not tell our story nearly loudly enough or articulately enough, and we do not, by and large, have secretaries of agriculture who know A from Izzard about these issues. And they are the ones, that secretary has the bully pulpit. And I include Republicans and Democrats on this. But this is what's being sold in Florida right now. We will see this coming across the country, and it will get to animal agriculture because we take those nutrients and put them on our land. And this is just about, the rule took effect on March 6th, just about a week and a half ago. This is how many people got involved in it. You probably have never heard of all this. These people are out there fighting for American agriculture, and a judge who didn't have any background in agriculture ruled against agriculture. So at the end of the day, they're going to set standards. This is aimed right at American agriculture and American animal agriculture because of the nutrients we put out there. This is just background for you to read when you have time, if you're very interested in this whole situation. This is what I want to finish up with. You ever think of agriculture as a criminal activity? EPA does. They are indicting farmers all over this country for what I would call negligent acts. Water falls on your land, and we do have an ag stormwater runoff exemption, but EPA is doing everything it can to undermine that for animal agriculture. They're trying to destroy it and are being very effective at doing it. The cases I'm going to talk about are just the ones in the last year. There are hundreds of these going back over the last 3 to 4 years. And this started under the Bush administration, so I'm not being partisan about this. But we are seeing, as a threat to American agriculture, the criminalization of manure spreading, application on the ground, or if you don't control what runs off of your property, that can be deemed a criminal act because you knowingly allowed the rainfall to take the manure off of that farmer or CAFO's property. These are real cases. U.S. Attorney said the discharge was a negligent discharge. We never used to criminalize negligence in this country. And we don't do it against hardly anybody at this point except farmers, because most of them can't fight back. I called up one of these lawyers and said, "Why in God's name didn't you fight this?" He said, "Mr. Baise, I'm a criminal lawyer, you're a civil lawyer. You know a lot more about this than I do, but let me just tell you something. When you sit down across the table and the assistant U.S. attorney, who may have just gotten out of law school and probably graduated at the bottom of their class, says to you, you have this choice, Mr. X, you may go take this to trial, but if you lose, your farmer client's going to jail for 15 to 25 years. Now, if we cut a deal, maybe you get something like you see here with regard to this Idaho dairy farmer." They said, "Mr. Baise, what deal are you going to make?" And I said, "You made a good deal and you couldn't get out of the room fast enough as far as I'm concerned." That's what farmers and small, and again, these are sometimes sizable operations, but taking on the United States Department of Justice and the U.S. Attorney is a very awesome and scary task for most of us. This is a North Carolina hog producer in July of last year. Charge was discharged hog manure from lagoons. Actually, there may have been an overflow due to rains from the lagoon. The news stories I read doubted whether discharge ever got into a water of the state of North Carolina. Look what he got. Now, this is a 4,500 confined hog feeding operation. $1.5 million in fines. That's what EPA is doing to CAFOs in this country. Because you can read a book, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with it, and I always hate to suggest reading sort of the enemy's propaganda, but it's good to read. It's called Animal Factory by David Kirby. And if you haven't read that book, I urge you to take a look at it, because it says we need to end the concentrating of animals in this country. As Brian talked about, you've got opinion leaders. Don Thompson just took over as head of McDonald's. Actually, he's a Purdue University graduate, knows many of the folks in the pork industry. Get rid of gestation stalls. Or, my last item will be on something that you've heard of called pink slime. This is what we are up against, my friends. These folks want to run CAFOs out of business. That's laid out in the book. It also points out that we have to stop poisoning our people with antibiotics generated by companies such as Brian's, because the environmentalists say we in agriculture are polluting our water with what's running into it. They're polluting the air with all the pesticides we're putting into it, plus all the ammonia and hydrogen sulfide from our CAFOs. But we most of all are poisoning our people through frankenfoods, through GMOs, and antibiotics. That's what's being said. Those are the kinds of things we fight in the courts. Now this one, you'll really, anybody here from Indiana? Well, take a look at that. Now, here's a mint farmer. When you grow mint up in northern Indiana, you have to use hot water, get the oil out of the mint. Then you discharge the hot water. This guy was discharging it into a roadside ditch, which is a water of the United States, in case you didn't know it. Now, I don't know how many of you have had dogs most of your life. I don't know many of my dogs that ever jumped in a ditch with scalding water. That's what was claimed here. And this guy gets 8 months home detention, 2 years, like going to jail. So I just give you that as a legal threat to all animal agriculture going on right now. This is a case I'm involved in which will impact all CAFOs in this country if I win it or I lose it. All the environmental groups are trying to jump into it. I represent, as I said, Roseacre Farms, second largest egg producer in this country. EPA and North Carolina take a position that everything that comes out of those fans, everything has to be controlled under a Clean Water Act permit. What that does do is give them the authority to have you have a nutrient management plan to control what you put on the ground. This is a huge issue. I'm sure he will be writing about it, whether we win, lose, or draw on this. How many of you have heard Beef Products, Inc.? This is our client. I'm not on the case. This shows you how quickly things can turn. This is 97% protein that we're talking about here, friends. You heard the news yesterday. 3,000 people were laid off, 3 plants were shut down. This just drives my point home. There are real threats out there, and we are losing. We have lost on the crate issue at, what is it, Brian, in Arizona, Florida, California. Oh, yes, California, about the egg deal, yeah. In fact, California passed their Proposition 2, led by those great agricultural leaders like Meryl Streep and Glenn Close. But they won. We lost. Look at the puppy mill law in Missouri. Now, we're beginning to win that back. Horse slaughter issue, we're beginning to win that back. But we win in the court of or we lose in the court of public opinion. Eventually, we can get the facts out there. Now, most of you know what these folks do. They take the bones. They take, just like you're cooking a ham bone in your soup, get all the meat off of it. That's why it's 97% protein, added in 70% of the hamburger. 10 to 15 pounds of lean beef comes from each carcass. The ammonium hydroxide kills the pathogens. Without that in there, by and large, sports fans, we may see more E. coli problems. Think about that. A USDA smart bureaucrat coined the term pink slime, and it stuck. And as you heard me say, as you've read in the newspaper, 3,000 of our citizens are out of jobs today. Now, hopefully, things can get turned around, and things will change. Now, as I said at the beginning of this talk, this is not a rosy picture. This is not a happy thought. And again, by and large, I think we will win this in the long run because I have great optimism, as Brian does, about the American farmer and stories like the 2 guys I just told you about. We will figure out how to solve these problems. But in the meantime, just want to make it clear, we have enormous threats, and they are legal threats because what happens to a minority in this country? They use the courts to win or lose. We in agriculture have never taken that cause up. Now your American Farm Bureau, groups such as yours, are going to have to do that. Now, as Admiral Halsey said during World War II, there are no great men in life, only great challenges which ordinary men rise to meet. I think we can do that. I think we will do that. I think we will win in the end. I thank you for this opportunity to bring this sort of sobering story to your attention today. Thank you very much.